thank you. I hope you had a good lunch and have enjoyed the first half of the day. We have a very interesting, exciting session after lunch, which is all about trying to connect the dots between the different subnational and national initiatives that many of us are part of and involved in different ways. They had a breakout session actually before lunch to have a chat. I think maybe the first meeting between them kind of formally to talk about how to connect the dots. But we're going to hear from each of them briefly, 4 to 5 minutes each, about what they're doing, their objectives and so on. And then we will have some time to take questions and to explore how collaboration can be accelerated. I'm going to go down the list alphabetically by initiative, so starting with Dublin. And you can either, I'm going to stand here, because apparently the chair can't fit or something, so are you happy to sit and do that?
I'm delighted to sit, thank you.
All right.
So thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for Ireland here. We're delighted to participate in such a panel as this. And so from the perspective of Ireland, a number of years ago, the state, our former Prime Minister, was very interested in this agenda and had a look at the agenda and said, what could Ireland do in this area around our own International Financial Services Centre, which is back thriving again after recent challenges, as is our domestic financial services centre. So we had a cabinet memo cleared by a Prime Minister and cabinet to say, let's look at the whole area of green finance. We were slightly ahead of the curve, in that, as I said earlier on, there wasn't even a curve around green finance. People still saw it in large institutions that we were dealing with as corporate social responsibility. So during the recession, the focus that we wanted wasn't put on this agenda as much as we wanted. And the real trigger for us getting our act together in the last few years was obviously COP21, and actually seeing the extent of what the financial institutions were doing in this space. So what government did, and our Prime Minister and the team, was that they merged 2 entities in Ireland, one called the Green International Financial Services Centre, and one called the Greenway, which is focused on clean tech innovation to create Sustainable Nation Ireland, which is what I head up. Sustainable Nation Ireland is a public-private backed initiative, private sector initiative, which is looking to promote and position Ireland as a leading hub for sustainable finance, sustainable innovation, sustainable skills. So that's a way, it's co-funded by the public and private sector. We have a small team, around 10 people. And with regard to this agenda today, we have 3 to 4 different initiatives under the Green and Sustainable Finance banner. One, as mandated by our Department of Finance, we have a committee called the Finance Green Committee, which is chaired by the former President of the European Parliament, Pat Cox. And that committee's role is twofold. One is to promote Ireland as a hub, an international hub for green finance. So we've got around 40 billion of green capital in play in Ireland at the moment, so it's a lot in an Irish context, across green bonds, across funds, and across asset management. And if I could just stay with that point for a moment, Ireland historically has not been an asset management hub. It's been more middle and back office. But what you had in the last 15 years in Ireland is you had a bunch of wind and solar developers that actually were very good at what they were doing and were developing projects in Ireland and all over the world, and they've actually morphed into asset managers now. And so there's a whole cluster of green asset managers in Ireland. The second part of the Finance Green Committee is actually to mobilise capital towards Ireland's national decarbonisation efforts. So it's really linking the capital system to the real economy, and that's what we're trying to do in Ireland. The state itself needs to invest Ireland needs to invest 120 billion over the next decades in our national decarbonisation. We worked with the state for a while. In the last few weeks, the state have announced the first 22 billion that they're going to invest in this plan, and it's about crowding in the private sector capital. The second part to our Green and Sustainable Finance initiative is we've now set up our own Sustainable and Responsible Investment Forum, SIF Ireland, which is focused on ESG. And one of the first things we're doing there is recognising that the Irish domestic capital market participants, such as the asset owners, are quite far behind on the ESG agenda versus other European jurisdictions. We've partnered with the UNPRI, and I'm delighted to say we're now doing a fiduciary roadmap exercise for 21st Century for Ireland, and that kicked off a few weeks ago. So we're really pleased that the UNPRI have supported us with that. The third part to the leg of Green and Sustainable Finance with the public-private sector initiative out of Ireland is focused on fintech, blockchain, and we're delighted that actually we're supported by the EU's Climate Kick initiative platform in doing that. And what we run in Ireland, we represent Climate Kick in Ireland. We're running an accelerator focused on green fintech. So by the end of the summer, with the support of Climate Kick, we'll have given out around 600,000 euros in grants to X number of companies, startups in this space that are trying to accelerate their initiative in green fintech. And then the fourth and final piece to the Irish green finance play is skills. is we recognise that on both domestic and international financial services side, there's a lot of good skills in Ireland, and how do we now upskill them in the area of sustainable finance? So the government have given us a large amount of capital to work with institutions in Ireland which are private sector to co-fund them as they go to develop programs to upskill their staff. So in summary, we started this a number of years ago. It didn't go quite as well as we wanted to for various different reasons. We revisited it a number of years ago. We've got the Prime Minister and Cabinet support to position and promote Ireland as a green finance hub, but recognising the link of the capital to the real economy. And then also the reason why we're here today and thrilled to be invited and included is we recognise as a very small country, in order for us to meet our own needs, we must collaborate with other institutions and learn from other centres such as London, such as Zurich, such as Frankfurt, best practice that we can bring back to Ireland, and hopefully those guys can learn as well. So thank you very much for including us today, and I hope that's a good snapshot of what we're doing in Ireland.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. A scarily impressive benchmark, actually, for the people to follow. You're doing an awful lot. Germany have 2 representatives. Frankfurt is going first, I think. So over to you.
Whatever. Okay. So thank you very much. I'm also delighted to be here. Yes, and I share the impression that that lots of things happening in Ireland. So the initiative within Germany I'm going to talk about is the Frankfurt, the Green Finance Cluster Frankfurt. It's a fairly young initiative. We started last year, basically. And despite the fact that discussion was pretty clear, so I should maybe start by who has initiated that? Where did the initiative come from? And that was actually from a discussion between the Ministry of the State of Hessen and at board level the larger financial institutions in Frankfurt. So interestingly, perhaps as a side remark, the Ministry of the State of Hessen is the ministry responsible for regulating the financial sector, the financial center of Frankfurt. That's why also the initiative came there. But lots of the discussion were actually driven and also inspired at the board level by the financial institutions. And it was pretty clear that there was some some dynamics there and the clear will to move forward, which I think is quite important to have this commitment at the board level, because that is what you need when you really want to look at not just a sort of a niche, but bring this into the larger perspective. Now, there was also discussion on where should the focus be, despite the fact that this was sort of set up as a place where knowledge and discussions should emerge between the larger financial institutions and potentially also other institutions, also the ministry. That the topic itself is, of course, the big topic of relevance is sustainability, while the deliberate discussion was to focus this cluster on green finance, because it's probably a first concrete part of the sustainable issue to where we can move forward, we can start doing stuff. And that is also how it is set up. So we'll focus on those issues, on green finance issues at the beginning. And this will, of course, at the beginning we'll have some kind of a benchmarking issue, so looking at the best practice or the practices as such that we find, how does it compare internationally, how do specifics of the different markets feed into that. Many of you might know that the German market is less capital market driven and more banking system. There's some peculiarities of the banking system in Germany, and there's also some peculiarities of the German economy which might play a role, but might also be of relevance to others. So that is something, and this is also one reason why we're quite honored as Frankfurt School, so I'm actually from Frankfurt School, to host the secretariat of that Green Finance Cluster Frankfurt. So at Frankfurt School we have a UNEP Collaborating Center for Climate and Sustainable Energy Finance, where between 20 and 30 people are working in a broader sense on this on an academic level. So we also have questions to ask and are happy to address specific questions and drive the discussions forward. So on top of that, it's not just looking at benchmarking. The institutions who are actually financially supporting this center also have an interest to address specific questions, and they are sort of driving the agenda in terms of research and looking at stuff of this, looking at specific questions of this green finance cluster. So Goethe University at Frankfurt is also involved to some extent, and we can jointly with the institutions, that's the plan, look at specific issues and drive understanding forward and also provides some kind of protected space where institutions can exchange about the trade-offs that will be there. To be honest, it's not all just always a one-way street, but there will be, from the perspective of institutions, some challenges and trade-offs, and these also need to be discussed in some way and addressed in order to move things forward. So I think I should leave it at that. We're quite looking forward to the future, and especially thrilled by how inspiration about the questions is coming from the financial institutions themselves.
Great, thank you. So over to Karina, who's going to speak about the Hub for Sustainable Finance, Germany.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe first a bit to our Accelerating Sustainable Finance Initiative, an initiative Deutsche Börse Group founded or initiated in spring last year because of two reasons. The one reason is the German sustainability strategy gets reviewed every 4 or 5 years by an international expert group, and the financial industry was characterized as underdeveloped in the field of sustainability, and guiding the sustainability strategy in Germany. I think in the last peer review report in the end of 2013. And the other thing is, as stock exchange, we have the public mission to provide safe, stable, and fair markets. And we do fear that we cannot fulfill this mission any longer without having an eye on the extra financial aspects in the market. So two good reasons for us to ask us, okay, what can we do to accelerate sustainable finance in Germany? And so we initiated Accelerating Sustainable Finance, the Accelerating Sustainable Finance Initiative coming out of the financial industry in Frankfurt, and focusing on 3 main topics. One task force is discussing everything around sustainable products and services within our markets. What is already there, what should be developed, and how can we do this? The second task force is focusing on ESG data, the database for sustainable investment, in combination with questions around about blockchain, digitalization, etc., artificial intelligence, that stuff. The third task force is dealing with future-proof investment strategies like impact investing and financial inclusion. That is the industry side in the heart of Frankfurt, closely connected with the green finance cluster. And of course, it's absolutely important to get the regulators, the civil society, and the government on our side to bring something forward or to move the case of sustainable finance. That is why we implemented the so-called Hub for Sustainable Finance Germany together with the Council for Sustainability in Berlin. That we have a kind of institutionalized permanent dialogue between regulators, the financial industry, the listed companies, civil society, and the government to get a kind of common understanding and how for sustainable finance is important to develop our own economic system and to play a responsible role within the European dialogue concerning sustainable finance and the way we want to move forward together. So I think we are on a good way in Germany to come to this common voice, to get our own understanding of sustainable finance and the needs and interests in our markets, but beside that, being a responsible partner for the other European member states in developing sustainable finance in the whole of Europe.
Great, thank you. So from Germany to Italy.
Do you have a slide?
Yeah, if you want to use your slides, they should be there.
Here they are. So the Italian Sustainable Finance Initiative is actually led by the government. So there is ministerial lead there, which you might think now it's a sort of liability in the light of the outcomes of the general election. But actually, it's been in the making for a number of years. And despite changes in the government, there's strong leadership at the departmental level, and this guarantees continuity and stability. The first step to the creation of the Sustainable Finance Initiative in Italy was the launch in 2016 of a national dialogue on sustainable finance, which was facilitated by UNEP Inquiry that involved, apart from the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of the Economic Development, all the industry, around 50 organizations. The result of this engagement was a report, Finance to the Future, where 18 recommendations were set out, and one of those was the creation of a sustainable financial center. In 2017, this work was carried forward within the context of the Italian presidency of the G7, and the same Ministry of the Environment managed to embed two green finance work streams within the preparatory work of the G7 ministerial meeting. One was on a green financial center network, and the second one was on green finance for SMEs, because it's a very important area for Italy, considering the makeup of its industrial development. And as a result of that, in the final communiqué of the environmental ministers in Bologna, there was a recommendation on endorsing a network of green financial centers, and a meeting of these green financial centers will be hosted in Milan in April to fulfill that commitment. And this year, in January, an Italian observatory, a national observatory on sustainable finance, was set up officially as part of through a ministerial decree. So it's really part of the Italian bureaucracy, this observatory on sustainable finance. And apart from the work on the sustainable finance initiative, it also focuses on green reindustrialization, so the idea that the green financial sector can bring manufacturing back to Italy. And the second area is prudential risks, through the work of the Bank of Italy and the Insurance Association around climate resilience. I'm co-chairing the working group that is going to launch in April in Milan on the occasion of this meeting of the green financial sector, the Italian Sustainable Financial Initiative. And we have decided that our focus will be especially on financial innovation and the creation of, let's say, market infrastructure initiatives. Given our approach to the climate transition, the focus will be mainly on finding energy efficiency. So there's interest within the working group around creation of mechanism for the aggregation of demand of green funding, and especially for the retrofitting, and also for the funding of utilities like water utilities or anything that is more around social infrastructure. Of course, our initiative will be different from any other initiative because of the key features of the Italian economy. So, economy driven by SMEs, funding driven by bank lending, with the financial markets just playing a tiny role. We've seen already some market-driven step forward in terms of lending to renewable energy, adoption of the responsible insurance principles, and the creation of also a green bond segment and other, let's say, the prevalence in the small market, especially of green companies. So, based on this, starting from the next month, the new Italian Sustainable Initiative will start developing an action plan.
Great, thank you. So, Alison, you're on home turf. Over to
Yes,
you.
indeed. Thank you very much, Ben. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to represent London here in the very heart of the financial global city that is the City of London, and the Guildhall here, which is the home of the Corporation of London, which is the local authority for London, and I'm one of the elected members. And we've been driving through an initiative we call it the Green Finance Initiative, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. The City of London has been concerned with the Green Finance agenda for some time. In particular, in 2013, we hosted the government's Environmental Audit Select Committee in this very room, in which they launched a Green Finance inquiry. And that's been followed up by another Green Finance inquiry by the same committee, which hasn't yet reported. But it's interesting that the 4-year gap between the two will be interesting to see how, in the government's eyes at least, the whole green finance sphere has developed, we hope, and I'm sure it has. The city then, in 2016, set up the Green Finance Initiative, of which I'm the vice chair. And the aim of this is to provide market leadership on green finance and to promote London's world-class financial and professional services, not surprisingly. And what's interesting about the partnership is that it's very much based across the piece. It's got public and private sectors, and we have leading financial institutions, NGOs, professional services departments, and businesses, as well as academics. And our members and contributors include the London Stock Exchange, I know there are people here, HSBC, ICMA, BlackRock, Barclays, the Green Investment Group, as well as Aviva, JP Morgan, and the Bank of England, and many other professional services firms. The City of the London Corporation and the GFI are working very, very closely with government. As we've heard from other speakers, it's really important, I think, that the government of any nation needs to be involved in driving this through because of their own political drivers, and Treasury and the Department for Business, Industry, Energy and Industry Strategy have been very key to bringing that group together and ensuring that what we as a group say is fed back to government and then creates policies in its own right. We have a very exciting work plan, and the next major thing that's going to happen is we have a Green Finance Summit, which is in the Guildhall here on the 17th July. A little bit of a plug there, Ben, I hope you don't mind. If you are interested in attending, go on to the Green Finance Initiative website. The theme of that conference is mainstreaming green finance, and we're particularly concerned to follow up the areas that we've been focusing on over the last year or so. That includes things like data and risk, ensuring the green principles are well defined and accountable, building up the international contacts as we are today, and assisting in the creation of objective international accounting standards. All of that helping, in the case of the UK, to meet our climate change policy commitments. There are other major policy groups within the UK. We have the government's own Green Finance Task Force, and also the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which I expect you've heard about today. But both of them are complementary. We make sure we're not treading on each other's toes. There's a lot of complementary membership across the groups so that we make sure we're working together to the best effect. And obviously, because of our international nature, London has also been driving very much international relationships, and we're particularly promoting partnerships and bilateral economic dialogue at the moment, largely with China and with Brazil and with Mexico. And all of these are shaping up into important policies and also are creating themselves trilateral and quadrilateral relationships. So I'm very excited by this partnership here. It's important that we work together. And perhaps I can just add a personal note that in fact I'm very interested in the very ancient Hanseatic links that this part of Northern Europe had, driven from the German merchants who came out. And the English, the London home of this trading partnership in the Middle Ages was on the bank of the River Thames underneath Cannon Street Station. And that is the area that I represent now as the alderman. And we even have a walkway on the river called the Hanseatic Walk. And that has led to a very close relationship with Hamburg, who have kept up the bilateral agreement and arrangements. I go there every year and have linked in with other Hanseatic cities on the basis of that. So it's very interesting how this ancient linkage of an area and a geographical location can bring people together again. So I'm very delighted to be here, really exciting at the initiative. I'm sure many strands of work will come out. We've already had the meeting earlier today, and I hope it's something that we can all be proud that we've handed on for the future generations. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alison, and particularly like that thought of these ancient relationships being repurposed for a modern age. So thank you for that. Tom, Luxembourg.
Thank you very much for inviting us here. As you may have seen from the program, I'm a little bit the odd one out in the round in the sense that the agency I represent neither has sustainable nor green in the title. So Luxembourg for Finance is a private-public partnership between the Luxembourg government and the financial industry in Luxembourg. Our role is to help develop the Luxembourg Financial Center, and sustainable finance is one part of that. But we're also a member of the Luxembourg Climate Finance Task Force, and I will come back to that. But just to put sustainable finance in the context in Luxembourg, in fact, the context is the financial center. We have, contrary to most representatives here, maybe with the exception of Ireland, a relatively small domestic market, needless to say, but we have an important financial center in the sense that we act as a platform connecting investors, issuers, and investments across the world. So we're not necessarily home to the asset managers nor the issuers, but we're home to, let's say, the platform that connects them. We also have been active in sustainable finance for quite some time. So Luxembourg initially started focusing with initial focus in microfinance, knowledge transfer and capacity building. But in 2006, Luxembourg launched LuxFlag, which is a fund labeling agency, which initially focused on granting labels for microfinance funds. This has grown to other labels, but today 50% of assets, global microfinance assets, are labeled by LuxFlag. So this is the, let's say, that was the initial where we came from. For Luxembourg, it was very clear that if we really want to make a footprint in sustainable finance, we have the financial center is the means to do it. As you may know, Luxembourg is the largest fund center in Europe, 4.4 trillion euros of assets under management, and also in terms of responsible investment funds, it represents 1 in 3. It's the domicile of 1 in 3 responsible investments and 2 in 3 impact funds in Europe. So this was clearly for us the lever that we need to use. And then on the other hand, there's also the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, which acts as one of the leading debt securities listings centers, and was also the place where the European Investment Bank listed its first, or the world's first, green bond, the climate awareness bond, a little bit more than 10 years ago now. So out of that, we, in 2015, the Luxembourg Ministry of Finance and the Luxembourg Ministry for Environment and Sustainable Development decided to set up a dedicated climate finance task force, so leading up to COP21, with the idea of bringing together the public stakeholders and the financial sector to identify areas or initiatives that Luxembourg could develop to provide added value as a financial center or at an international scale. Out of that, several initiatives have come out in the meantime. In 2016, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange launched the Luxembourg Green Exchange, so actually the world's first platform exclusively dedicated to green securities, which made industry best practices and standards a mandatory requirement to be listed on the platform, but also demanded pre- and post-issuance reporting. It lists actually, it was quite successful because it lists 50% of the world's listed green bonds are now listed on this platform, which now has expanded to 2 other platforms, one for social bonds and one for sustainable bonds as well. The stock exchange has also created several links with its Chinese counterparts, launching index series, green bond index series with the Shenzhen and the Shanghai Stock Exchange, and has also launched a green bond channel with the Shanghai Stock Exchange to allow stock exchange listed in Shanghai to be displayed on the LGX as well. LuxFlag, that I mentioned before, introduced the climate finance label in 2016 for investment funds, on top of the microfinance and ESG and environmental label it had before. And then the Luxembourg government entered a strategic partnership with the European Investment Bank to invest in climate finance projects to essentially cover first loss tranches to encourage the onboarding or the scaling up via private investments, and also with the World Bank, the IFC, to host the Green Bond Cornerstone, Fund, which you're probably aware of. Finally, just last month, another initiative was launched, or launched its request for participation, which is a climate finance accelerator. Because one of the gaps that we identified is that you have a lot of asset managers that have a lot of know-how and very savvy on the climate side and on the project side, but may not necessarily have the experience, essentially startups, to launch funds, set funds up, and also raise finance. So the idea is this is really like an accelerator. These asset managers get support in setting up their funds and raising finance. And the first cohort will be onboarded in May. And then to conclude, we now have just started a similar process to what Italy has done with UNEP in road mapping, establishing a roadmap for Luxembourg to make the Luxembourg Financial Center more sustainable and identify gaps that need to be addressed, and also which obviously will also already consider the various HLAC recommendations to try and integrate them as much as possible. And then I would like to plug one thing as well. We will launch our first Sustainable Finance Forum on the 31st of May, to which you're obviously all invited as well. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Tom. So we're now going to hear from Stockholm.
Yes, thank you. We're also extremely pleased to be here today and on this panel right now, representing myself, the Stockholm Sustainable Finance Center, which is actually relatively young compared to some of the centers here. It was launched last year in November by the Swedish government and the Stockholm Environment Institute and the Stockholm School of Economics. So it's, of course, a non-profit initiative, as I said, primarily funded from the government, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Energy and Environment, which I think is a good mix of ministries to get this task tackled. As you heard from the panels this morning, I mean, there's already quite a bit of activity going on in Sweden when it comes to sustainable finance. The banking sector has been active in the green bonds from the very inception. Several issuers at the corporate level and public level. The AP funds, so our pension funds, have been quite at the forefront of decarbonizing or embedding ESG and this thing. I can do a bit of Swedish bragging because I'm not Swedish myself, so I think that's allowed. But nevertheless, even though all of these activities are going on in Sweden, there is still the recognition that actually when you look at the targets that we set in 2015 in terms of SDGs and Paris and climate, you know, we're actually not very close to what we ought to be doing. There is still a massive gap. Hence this initiative and this center to try and speed this up, really, and try to accelerate, push for the next wave, you know, beyond green bonds, great instrument. What's next? What kind of other innovations do we need to really get to the pace that we need to have in order to deliver on the SDGs and on Paris? As I said, we're pretty young, so we're still really scoping out the work streams and what we're actually going to do. But I think there are two characteristics that stand out. One, we're going to work quite a bit strongly on impact and the link between finance and the real economy. So this is not, you know, sustainable finance for us. It's not about necessarily tracking the green bonds, how many green bonds you've issued and so on, but it's more tracking the impact in the real economy. How much CO2 are you not emitting, or how much biodiversity are you keeping? And that link is what is crucial, important, and needs to be done in a transparent, cost-effective way. And I think there, a lot of innovation still needs to happen, and we'll focus that. That's one element, that's one characteristic. The other characteristic, which I haven't heard a lot throughout the day actually, is the recognition that, you know, we can't, of course we're going to focus on the Swedish market and European and so on, but also the emerging economies are critical here. So we are going to try and work from that angle as well, and engage with emerging markets, and I'll share now some thoughts around that, and how we can get them on board the sustainable finance journey. The way we are structured to try and deliver this is, you know, broadly speaking, in three pillars. We have research and innovation, where again we're going to push in new projects. We're collaborating with the Stockholm Green Digital Finance, which you've heard this morning, in terms of fintech innovation, but also other things. And we're also starting to discuss one of the topics that was mentioned this morning, this short-termism issue. So working with the financial players in the Stockholm area to really understand where do you lose the long-term perspective? Somewhere in how you do the math, you lose that perspective, and where is it lost, and how can we not lose it, basically. The second pillar is around education and capacity building. That's where the Stockholm School of Economics steps up in their partnership. And there again, we try to be quite concrete, so we are shaping both a 2 days kind of quick course and a longer 10 days program, executive program for financial players. And again, that's where there is also a link to the emerging economies. We're in conversations with the IFC and World Bank to provide this sort of service in terms of education and knowledge sharing also towards emerging economies. So India, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, this type of target group. And then the last pillar, of course, around engagement and outreach. We can't do anything without engaging, of course, and we want to speak up, be present internationally, show Stockholm and the Swedish experience and expertise, and hopefully the innovations that we can test in Sweden, and then showcase them and potentially collaborate on that. I think I've heard some conversations about competition and collaboration. To be honest, from our perspective, I think sustainable finance, we can all agree, is sufficiently niche still that I think we can collaborate without having to worry too much about competing for a few years. Hopefully, I wish we could be really, as soon as we start really competing for this, I think that's a good signal. I think we are getting there. So in that sense, and with that, from that perspective, I really welcome these kind of panels, the discussions and the breakouts that we've had in terms of getting the various centers to collaborate and maybe pick a few of the bottlenecks and help each other to unlock them.
Great, thank you, Luca. Switzerland.
I also brought a few slides, so maybe you could show
Somebody
them for us.
pass down the clicker.
We set Swiss Sustainable Finance up in 2014, so we've been around for roughly 3 years. And we were founded with the vision of making Switzerland a leading center in sustainable finance with two objectives, both having growth or fostering growth opportunities, but of course also having benefit for the society at large. How do we want to achieve this goal? Mainly through informing, educating, and catalyzing growth, which brings us to our strategic activities. In knowledge management, we focus around information through events and publications. We are currently on the move in getting the Swiss market study set up. We try to facilitate sustainable finance education, both through own tools. We will publish an online training module in Q2, which will be available for everyone around in this market. But we also cooperate with our Federal Office for the Environment in a research project on how to actually get sustainability into regular finance education, something I think which is still lacking a bit. In service development, we have different technical work groups. Relationship building is, of course, a natural element of such an industry association. And last but not least, market development. There we mainly focus on institutional asset owners. In Switzerland, we faced the challenge that our pension funds are not as far ahead as some of the examples we had on panels this morning. So we try to work with pension funds to really bring them forward in this subject. Just to give you an overview on the kind of membership we have, we're a purely membership financed association. It ranges from banks to asset managers, a lot of asset owners as well, service providers, but we also have network partners from the public sector and very importantly from universities and business schools with which we also have different projects ongoing. Other non-profits are, for example, the Swiss Insurance Association. So there again, we try to take up know-how from our members and offer it to other asset owners associations to bring the topic forward. We came up with quite some publications since we set the association up. I would like to highlight the last one, the Handbook on Sustainable Investments, that we co-published with the CFA Research Foundation. And I think it's quite a useful tool for pension funds, for insurance companies that haven't yet started the journey. You can download it online on the website or even order a copy. To the left, you see a survey that we did to find out what was the progress in Switzerland on the roadmap report that we also did jointly with the UNEP inquiry. So we were involved in the national report and now try to bring the different objectives forward. Events are always useful. We try to cooperate with different institutions, for example with CFA, but also with PRI or UNEP FI in setting up international events. But then again, we have a lot of local events with players such as the Swiss Fund and Asset Management Association or Swiss Insurance Association as well. This is the way we try to bring the know-how from our members into the market and foster a dialogue. A thing that is definitely still needed to get sustainable finance into the mainstream. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, that's 8 initiatives, each of which identified at least 3 things that they're doing, or other initiatives within their jurisdictions that are doing stuff in this space. A huge amount going on. We have, and a few jurisdictions that weren't here, couldn't be here, that sent their apologies. Paris in particular couldn't make it today. So I'm just very impressed at how much is going on. I've got one quick question, because the origins of the different initiatives seems to be quite different. So I kind of want to gauge, to what extent your more private, your kind of origins are more private sector versus public sector. So if you're more kind of government kind of origins and run, put your hand up. Come on, so is that 3? Okay. And private? A mix? Okay, all right. That's interesting. And then the other question I had before opening up was, what do you think, just very quickly, what do you think are the sort of the pre-competitive things that you can focus in on and collaborate on? Are there sort of ideas that you have that come to mind immediately, things that you're like, okay, well, we should definitely just be collaborating on this?
For me,
this is for everyone. So
for me, it would be engagement with regulators. So if we manage to engage as a coalition of financial centers with IOSCO, for example, on the implementation of disclosure regulation or other financial regulations, it would be really powerful.
Any others? Yeah.
I think standards, really, and I mean, work is going on with regard to creating standards, what is green, and we've been through all the arguments, I'm sure, but I think there's still a push to make sure that we are clear about what the standards are, and it sort of goes partly with the regulatory side as well, but I think that would give a boost to and confidence to the system.
Yeah, Sabine?
I think education is a field that is pre-competitive, and I think at a lot of universities we still don't see enough sustainable finance courses. I think we can learn from each other in this field.
Absolutely.
and also use offerings that are available in different countries.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, much of the issues I'd support. I'd like to issue a word of caution about the discussion with regulators, because my experience is that when having someone else to talk to a regulator on behalf of yourself, the commercial banks tend not to be all very easy about having others talk to the regulator, but that's certainly an issue where coordination will help, and this is why banks want to exchange. I would also think that in the area of having sort of joint ideas about what to communicate some of the challenges might be a function, because the image of the financial sector hasn't been the best over the recent years. Since the financial crisis, there's still some, and that topic is also a topic where we could make up some ground if you want, and communicating some of the true challenges in a sensible and responsible way could also probably be something that makes sense.
Yep.
I just think two things. One, we have to focus on the real economy. Where's the capital going at the end of the day? And I think sometimes, I've come from a technology policy background, and sometimes I'm in meetings and just things are going over my head and different mechanisms and structures and so on around finance. And so the dialogue or the communication gets lost, and at the end of the day, this is about jobs in a local village, in a local factory, whatever that may be. I'm putting energy efficiency measures into my big factory. Where am I getting the capital from? Show me how I get the capital, make it easy for me. The banks have to have the skill sets, and the policymakers have to put the enabling environment in place. So we're part of a jigsaw, and I think what I liked about the H-leg that came out recently was that kind of linkage of that jigsaw and where is capital going to. And then the second point is we also have to recognise, what's terrific about on this panel, and obviously finance for tomorrow in Paris as well, is that not all European finance hubs are as far along or starting or wherever we may be on this journey yet. And so Europe in itself, I can just focus on Europe, needs to unlock X trillions. And so we need to begin to work with other hubs in other countries that perhaps only have a domestic focus, not international, like London or Lux or Frankfurt. And so one of the things we're doing with Climate Kick, and we got this approved, only found out the other day, is we are looking at capacity building for the other hubs, around 20 of them within Europe, to try and get them to embed sustainable finance. And so what this group can do is actually share lessons in a way which is distilled very quickly into those different hubs. Say, this is what we did, this is where I went wrong, this is why Stephen became bald, because I wasn't able to get it the way that I wanted to. This is why London did this, why Frankfurt did it. Grab all that together in a way that actually isn't too competitive right now because it's public information, and share with other hubs. And that would be a great European project to do as a collective.
Yeah, and internationally, of course, and that's part of the reason for this UNEP network.
And
well, actually, this is part of the UN network. This is the European chapter saying, right, we're actually going to do something solid as part of that.
Yeah.
And before that horizon, I think we should bundle our expertise, because we have so many different platforms. We'll be talking about sustainable finance within the Sustainable Stock Exchange of the United Nations, the financial center idea, our own initiatives. And sometimes I fear that we are losing kind of speed when we discuss the topic in so many different on so many different platforms without having an eye on, like you said, what is my partner doing in Ireland or in Luxembourg. And I think it's important that we are staying on the same page and getting our initiatives as consolidated as possible.
Great. So we've got time for a couple of questions or interventions, points you might want to make to this group and on this topic. Does anyone want to come in? Bright ideas? Feedback? Nothing? Come on, guys. All right. Oh, there we go. Somebody at the back.
How often are you going to meet in the future in this format?
The next gig's in April, right? We're all in Milan.
Yeah.
Yes, so there will be overlaps, I think, of meetings. So as far as the UNEP network, the next meeting is in April in Milan, and probably this network as well. We'll meet quite often. I think it's not so much what the meeting, but the action plan. So what the network already met in Casablanca in September, and since then there's been work to define the priorities and to also identify leadership. So the idea is that probably there will be one center leading on a specific initiative and the other other centers contributing. So the key is the action plan, not so much the meetings.
And it'll be interesting, you know, and we can come back in a year or two and actually see who has been delivering, living up to the hype, right? I mean, and we can nudge people who aren't doing enough. Any other points or questions? Yeah. Sorry. Jessica first, and then the lady.
So I think one of the interesting things that has come through quite a lot of the discussions is that need for collaboration. And I think a few of you touched on examples where absolutely there will only be change if it is global, and therefore coordination and collaboration is key. One of the other things that we certainly see is then obviously competition. So I'd be interested in your perspectives around actually, is there an element where you see competition with one another, either positive or negative, because I think there's both sides, that either might be driving progress amongst different European capitals on this agenda in a positive way, or elsewhere you feel that some of that competitive tension might set things back?
Great question. I'm going to take the other question as well at the same time.
Clara Kaminski from the Austrian Environmental Agency. We don't have a hub like this in Austria yet, and how would it be possible for our decision makers in the governments to address some of you to find out how you did it, or is there going to be some way for countries that don't have it yet to join? How is this going to be organized by this partnership?
Okay, so two really important questions. So I think let's end on the second question, but begin on the competition question. So who wants to go first?
So this is a very general answer, but I think since it's, everyone knows that at the moment the sustainable assets or the green bonds or the sustainable funds, all of this is relatively small compared to the overall market. So I think competition in and of itself cannot be a bad thing in the sense that we create more product in the end and encourage initiatives. So I think overall it's not a bad thing. So I think this is
a very diplomatic answer.
Yeah, for me, the key is the kind of regulatory environment that you create through your influence. And so building on Alison's point on standards. So, for example, at the European level, when you have a directive, then it is implemented, it is transposed in different ways across different jurisdictions, and you see that depending on how restrictive or permissive the implementation is, you create immediately a competition across the centers. So for this reason, it is so important to engage with regulators, because in this way you create a level playing field where there are the same framework conditions, and the competition can be about the quality of the projects, the quality of the investment decisions that are made, but not driven by tax issues or other framework conditions. So I think there's room to take this noise out of the competition between financial centers.
So Alison, did you want to come in? No.
Not particularly, other than I think, competition's healthy, we all thrive on it, we've all got to be grown up and accept it's there, and we do all really have slightly different offerings, and where we overlap, then it's we just have to live with the real world, I think.
Yeah, Luca and then Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I agree with that. I just wanted to reiterate maybe what I said in my intervention before, which I think that the space right now is really quite big in itself. I mean, if you're looking about sustainable finance or whatever, the asset, green bonds compared to normal bonds, I mean, you don't need to compete, right? I mean, the space, it's about unlocking that space. And in that sense, centers like us, of course, might compete in terms of leadership about, who gets the pride of having unlocked one or the other. I don't feel it like that. I would much rather collaborate, get that sorted, and then there's, I think for some years, quite a bit of space to everybody have a big cake, and then we might get into competition rights. But you know, I will be happy to get there.
I think if I look at, say, what we're doing on our green finance piece, so one obviously is the International Financial Services Centre, and yes, we're going to be competing, so let's just call it what it is, right? And it's great to be able to, as Alison said, competition is good, and the more competition, it shows the healthiness of the marketplace. But the second piece that we look at is, how do we mobilise capital, both domestic and international, to invest in Ireland's national decarbonisation efforts, which is around 120 billion. So the state has done their bit, our sovereign wealth fund's doing their bit, so we have a second part, Action 13 of our national mitigation plan, saying how do we get out there, and we're playing a role in that. So one of the things that we're doing with the City of London Green Finance Initiative is, and we announced it at an Irish embassy dinner in London here last year with 100 people, saying that we're going to host a joint event with the guys this year here in London, saying, okay, you've got the finance green, you've got ourselves in Ireland, how can we collaborate to create the right conditions to unlock capital to fund the decarbonisation of the British Isles in its entirety? And that's something, when you look, that came about through in international financial services. Can we have a chat? And then when we got talking about it, we said, you know, there's a lot of UK capital is coming into Ireland right now because of expertise and so on, and that capital is working in Ireland and going abroad. There's a lot of Irish capital and expertise coming into the UK. So whatever may happen in the future, we're still the closest neighbours. So on the international financial services, yes. At a domestic level, how can we unlock that capital? Because we're too small as a country. We don't have that capital in its entirety, so we have to work with bigger partners, and that's something which is really positive. That's about jobs. That's about the real economy. Okay?
Sabine, quickly.
Just the last comment. I'm with my colleagues that we're far from having it mainstream, so I don't think competition is the major problem right now. And especially on the side of the asset owners that also drive this development, there is no real competition between pension funds in different countries. There we can just really learn from each other and use the role models that are there to also stir the development in other countries.
And Ulf, you wanted to come in?
Yeah. Quickly. Perhaps that's too much of an economist answer, but competition can happen on many levels. You know, there's different projects which compete. You know, and then there's banks who can compete to finance the better project, and then there's financial centers who are competing. And frankly, you know, for us, it's probably helpful that I don't like the fact that Germany wasn't the first one to have initiatives in our French, but you know, it probably helped that there were initiatives in other.
You've now got two.
In other, yeah, no, you're going to be more in the future, perhaps. No, kidding, but that is so competition on that level is, you know, also into the Austrian direction. That's probably helpful, you know, and that point it was, you know, it can be used constructively. Now when we're providing sort of public goods, something that is, you know, of general use, of general help to the society, basically, you know, then, you know, probably it's a good idea to, you know, maximize output by collaboration. So what you said, you know, let's consolidate the number a little bit, that probably makes sense. But the tricky role of the government here is, and now coming back to the question, you know, when talking to financial institutions, how to, you know, hit the thin line between, you know, helpful competition and cooperation. You know, the idea of the government, the role of the government is typically to try to set the rules such that the competition is constructive, and you know, that's also being very concrete for the regulation. What might be a good idea is to set some regulation on how things have to report it. You know, there will be discussion, there probably will be coordination among the institutions. But on top of that, the individual institutions will think about how can we use the information that's provided in a way, you know, that we do not want to share with everyone, but how can we use the information that's provided in a way that can provide us a competitive edge, and, you know, getting that going. I think that's the brilliant task here.
And I think part of the whole point of this partnership is about competition as well as collaboration. It's about making sure that we're all fighting to be the best. Because by fighting to be the best, we can then change the world and deliver on Paris and the SDGs, right? But there are clearly some bits of the system where, you know, there is no competition. And your points have been about asset owners across jurisdictions, a fantastic one. And then in terms of the you know, this group here will hopefully be, and hopefully there'll be others in it, will be the sort of, you know, the Premier League, or pick your sport, you know, hopefully the best, constantly breaking records, constantly outperforming and doing more and doing it better. And then, you know, the question of how do we support other actors in this space and bring them up. And I think that's about sort of defining best practice and then helping others use it and adopt it. Now, clearly capacity building is an area that could be very helpful for that. So.
And also onto that, there's so many ways of creating a green financial center. So you've seen the diversity that even if there's no government backing in a country, there can still be a sustainable finance initiative. And so there are no strict parameters to join, and think this is important.
I think one important step could be a kind of stakeholder analysis in your own financial center or in your own market, because the needs and interests are different from center to center and from market to market. That is why we see here this kind of heterogene situation between green, sustainable, how the initiatives and projects are built up, etc. And the question is, what are your stakeholders interested in, and how do their needs look like? Because in the end, an initiative is successful when it answers questions and when it gives guidance, etc. And that always depends on the individual situation in the market or in the financial center. And based on that stakeholder analysis, it's easier to get the government on board, because then you have a kind of idea what you are talking about. You can say, okay, we are lacking transparency in the field of ESG, we are lacking sustainable products or services in that way, or kind of institutionalized dialogue, how our financial center should look like in 5 or 10 years or whatever. And with this concrete list of needs and interests, you get the government on board. That's our experience in Germany, I think.
Okay, we are now out of time, I'm afraid, but a good point at which to end. So join me in thanking the panel.
Sorry, just...
Do it offline.